Welcome to Drama-Free Healthy Living with Jess Cording. I'm your host, Jess Cording. I'm a registered dietitian, health coach, and author, and I'm here to help you streamline your wellness routine and establish a sane, more balanced relationship with food and fitness so you can reach your goals without losing your mind. On this podcast, we'll talk about nutrition, exercise, self-care, mindset, and more. I'll be bringing you interviews and expert insight on the topics that matter to your health and wellness. Hi, and welcome back to the Drama-Free Healthy Living podcast. I'm your host, Jess Cording. I'm so excited you're here today. I know I say that every time, but I truly am excited to bring you each and every one of these podcast episodes with my guests. So today I am speaking with Linda Jaros, who is the brand educator and experience specialist at OOFOS footwear. So, okay, I love nerding out about sports, nutrition, and exercise physiology, recovery, rest. We get into all the things today. So Linda began her sports muscular therapy practice in 1984, specializing in rehabilitative and recovery work with professional, Olympic, and amateur athletes. She has a wide background of various types of fitness and exercise training, such as she's a certified yoga instructor. She's been a dance instructor. She also has done a lot of breathwork and meditation coaching. And she also does a lot of volunteer work still with veterans. So Linda, and she tells us a little bit about this today in this episode. She founded a wellness center in Rhode Island called the Life Breath Wellness Center. And she has served as an educational and keynote speaker at wellness events and the AMTA. And she's also co-authored a chapter on rest and recovery in the Running Times Guide to Breakthrough Running, as well as the book Breathe and Grow Rich. So she brings this extensive background in wellness and healthcare and fitness to her role today with OOFOS, where we're going to get into just what people need to know about active recovery and how the technology and the shoes, how it's really designed to help people recover more efficiently. So we go really deep into some topics related to just how breathwork changed her life, the way that tiny daily recovery habits can transform your health for the better, how to incorporate rest and recovery in everyday life, and why so many of us struggle with that, how we maybe think we're resting when we're really not. And we also talk about, again, the science of this recovery type of footwear and just what it truly means to rest and to recover. We also talk about Linda's own self-care essentials and what healthy living means to her. So enough of me talking. Let's get to the episode. Linda, welcome to the podcast.
Wait, thank you. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad we're finally officially doing this. I know we've had a number of conversations over the past month, and it's nice to actually be finally sitting down and having a whole talk about this topic. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Great. Yes, I am as well.
So I am just fascinated by your work. I don't remember if we talked about this, but I have one of my very first jobs as a teenager was I was a tennis instructor for a number of years, and I played some sports. It's like my secret. And I was like a closet athlete. I'm a Pilates instructor, and something that I wish that that had been on my radar when I was younger. It was really the importance of recovery, which I know we're going to talk about a lot today. But I want to go way back. I love asking people their origin stories. And can you tell me a little bit about what inspired you to work in sports muscular therapy that's so specialized? And I think our listeners would really love to know what that entails and just how you found your way there.
Yeah, I started when I was 24 years old, 1984. It's way, way back. And what's interesting in that time is it wasn't something that everybody was doing or looking at doing. I started getting interested in it because I was in the fitness industry. I taught dance. I was very physically active, and I was a co-manager of a facility that was kind of multiplex. At the time, those didn't exist a lot. And what I mean by that is we had physical therapy and various other things as part of this health club in the Boston area. And so I met somebody that was from Russia that actually was a medical doctor, an orthopedic, but he did massage. And I found that unusual. He came to this country. He couldn't get his medical credentials here. So I observed him doing all this work. It fascinated me because it was part of their whole medical, protocol there in Russia. So we actually connected, and then I started looking into schools. I couldn't at the time afford physical therapy to go to school for physical therapy. And so I started saying, well, what other modality is under that? And muscular therapy, or fascial work, as I like to call what I did for years, was something that I thought, wow, I could really get into this. So that's what got me started and inspired my own fitness, and then really being opened up to that world. Yeah.
That is so cool. My husband and I, we've been catching up on watching Physical on the show, and the view into the 80s fitness scene is so interesting. It's so different, it seems, from what it is today.
Yeah. Back in the 80s, early 80s, there were a few people doing muscular therapy, and I happened to start, in the health club facility I was in while I was going to school. There were a lot of professional athletes. There were Patriot players from the 80s. When they were on strike, they'd come in and work out in the facility because the owner had ties to football and whatnot. And there were some major players in the field of professional athletes, orthopedics, that were connected to this facility. So I had an opportunity, like a front row seat to that athlete caliber. And as well as I got very much into the running scene with the likes of Bill Rogers, Joan Benoit Samuelson, and Patty Dillon, her name is now, but Catalano was her name in the 80s. And it just really kind of mushroomed from there. It was a word of mouth situation of me starting to work with people, in that scene. So yeah, it was a fascinating time and extremely busy, competitive, and I really have learned over the years, having done it for 37 years, I learned so much about athletes of all levels, all calibers, and recovery and the importance of it. Yes.
So I know you touched on fascial work. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about, what goes into sports muscular therapy?
Well, when a client comes in and they've got an injury, one thing that I feel like at the time that I started that I did differently is I looked at the whole body. I didn't just, isolate. And I had wonderful people around me in the area of physical therapy, especially a gentleman by the name of Dan Dyrek that worked with the Celtics and later with the Red Sox. He was a mentor of mine. And then we kind of became colleagues in that, he looked at the body as a whole as well. So when you look at the body from a fascial standpoint, it's a network of connective tissue that connects us literally to our organs, to our bones. And so I looked at this network and I would look at where the injury was, but then I'd look further away from that site to find out what's going on with the biomechanics. And so for me, it was, I liken it to this. When I was younger, I met a woman that was blind, and I watched her with her braille writer, and I watched her read books. And I remembered putting my fingers over, the raised letters and whatnot, and thought, how does she do this? And then years later, when I started to do, the fascial work, my fingers were picking up on things that I didn't even realize I had such a sensitivity. But the more I did it, the more I could feel it. So when I started to connect with Dan Dyrek specifically, he was aware because I was working with the same clients he was. And all of a sudden they'd come in and to him and they'd have scar tissue. They'd come in to see me. They'd go back to him and he'd go, where did it go? And he thought, so he connected with me and said, I really want to see what you're doing because there's something happening here. So we developed this real great connection over the years, working synergistically and complementing each other with it. So, but the fascial work, to me, it's the essence of how our bodies function, our nervous system. It really is.
Yeah, oh my goodness. I remember learning about fascia and it just blew my mind. This is so cool. Like I never really looked at the body the same way again.
Right. Yeah, it's very, very different when you can't, when they say when you know something, you can't unknow it.
Hmm.
That's the way I looked at it was this is the way and the direction that I went. And I didn't realize at the time there were a lot of body workers that weren't, there were a few of us that were kind of doing that back in the day. And professional athletes would seek us out mainly because they really, really needed to be on point. If they had an injury going on and they're getting paid to do what they're doing, it was like they wanted to be better yesterday. And so we really had to look at it, be very comprehensive, work with a team of people around us to kind of complement and get them back on their feet or in the game, whatever it was that we were working with.
Yeah, and I understand, a lot of your work has been in the athletics world in terms of like recovery and helping people, heal more efficiently. And I'm so fascinated to know, rest, recovery. It's nice to see that they're talked about more in the media now, just for lay people. But was that something that you knew you wanted to focus on when you started doing this work, or did it find you?
That's a great question. I would say it totally found me. And the way it really found me, the last 20 years of my career, I got drawn to breath work. And it's something today that is extreme, it's blowing up in a beautiful way. There's so many different people, presenting it. People would ask me, what's the best form of breath work? And I always say the one that you'll do.
Right.
I say that about self-care. I say that about, all of that. But what happened was I was looking at it for a new modality to share with my clients. And that's how I approached it. That's how I approached a lot of it. Well, what happened was I went in and took a class and I signed up for a facilitator training, not just going in and experiencing it. I had taught yoga for years and I experienced yogic breathing, which was more directed and controlled and had very specific outcomes. But when I went into this, it was a circular breath technique, which basically is more flowing and movement. And I went in and I had an experience that was life-changing. It was every emotion I could possibly feel I went through while I was breathing. But more, and then I realized when I had that first experience, there was a completely different feeling in my body, nervous system. All of a sudden, there were stressors that were not there anymore. And it got to the point where I started to practice daily because I thought, you can't share something with other people if you're not engaged in it. That's how I approach things. So for me, I looked at rest and recovery a little differently. I think prior to that, it was, let's get the body moving and get you back on your feet so you can go out and do what you do. And I looked at it that way for me. Even with yoga and exercise, it was still moving. And so what breath helped me do was to stop and to really tune in to what is my body feeling on every level, physical, emotional, you name it. And for me, that became key. So I went back to my practice and there wasn't one athlete I wasn't working with and or non-athlete that I wasn't introducing the breath to and saying, I want you to experience this, because when the nervous system is not balanced, it doesn't matter what injury is going on. It can't heal as effectively. The body doesn't have the tools to do it. So for me, it was like that experience shifted my focus about what recovery really was and how to share that with people. So I worked with, I actually worked with some of the military coming back from overseas, and I volunteered some time to introduce breath because I kind of felt like that was a group of people that really I connected with. I did have clients that were Vietnam vets, Iraqi vets, and Afghanistan specifically. And when I got a chance to share that and to watch what was happening, it was really meaningful.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was a backdoor, but wow, it just is it's so prevalent, and it's a daily conscious practice in my life. I still do some volunteer work now with it, post-COVID, to kind of help some people that were having a hard time getting off of supplemental oxygen. There's a nurse that sought me out. I'm at 7,400 feet here in Colorado. So when people went through COVID here, it was a little different than when they were at sea level. Yeah. So, it's a real good feeling to be able to share that with people and to, help them, heal and get more healthy.
Yeah, I love that so much. And it's funny with Pilates, that was what drew me to it when I remember I tried it a few times in college. I was like, this is really cool. But it was when I was in my I guess I was like 24, 25. I ended up with a terrible like stress fracture like injury in both my arms. And there were a lot of factors in that. But I remember going to a physical therapist and she recommended Pilates because she was like, listen, like you want to build core strength because that's going to help you prevent future injury. And I remember getting there and just the breath was like seeing how the breath tied into movement and how I felt mentally, physically when being more conscious about breathing. And it's not the same, obviously, as, more traditional breath work, but just the power of our breathing for so many different things that we don't really think about. Like it really changed the way that I approached just moving as a human being on this planet and
Yes.
just day to day life. And like I was like, I don't want to just do this. I want to like learn this and be able to share it with other people. But, it's funny. I grew up, my mom's a psychotherapist and a hypnotherapist. I talk about her a lot on this podcast. And remember her introducing me to different breathing techniques as a teenager. And, like many teenagers, I was angsty and anxious and I resisted for a really long time because, when you're getting something introduced to you by a parent, it is so different from finding your own way to it. But damn, if I could go back in time and just implement some of what she shared with me when she initially shared it with me, would have had a much, much better experience, I think, along the way.
Look, it's that, statement, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. I mean, when I got introduced to breath work and I'd say to somebody, I facilitate breath or I'm a breath coach and they laugh. Initially, it's like, well, what do you mean? We all breathe. What's interesting when I began that journey for me, I realized I was a yoga teacher for years and I realized I was holding my breath. I'd be working with an athlete on the table. And as I'm working and concentrating, I realized at that point when I became very aware how many times I held my breath. So I let people know it's very natural to recognize that in yourself when you begin to do something consciously, you'll be very aware of it and not to judge it, just be aware and go, wow. And then I realized when the difference for me now is I can go through a stressful experience and I can feel and I'm really aware in my body how I'm holding that if I am. And then I'll spend a little more time with some conscious breath so that it can integrate. The stressors can integrate and the stress isn't leading my life. It's actually part of a shift or a change, but it's not, really taking a toll on my immune system or anything like that. So for me, it's like I said, a daily practice, but it's great when you become aware of those things.
Oh, I find I feel like I use my breath work. I don't know, training's not the right word, but I rely on breath work a lot when I'm driving because it is so easy. I lived in New York City. I lived in cities for 17 years. I was in Boston for 4 years. I was in New York City for 13 years. And then when we moved to a place where I had to drive every day, it was really hard. I struggled so much. Like the first 6 months, I would be stress sweating like every time I got behind the wheel. But and that thankfully did go away after a while. But even now, sometimes if I'm driving and something stressful happens, like someone cuts you off or all those things happen as you're driving, like just things, unexpected things you don't welcome. And I feel the rise of the cortisol and reaction of like, oh my gosh. And then I'm like, okay, I feel it happening. We're going to calm this down because being stressed out about this is not going to help you, act in a calm way that's constructive and helpful. And I will make myself like just breathe deeply, or I have other relaxation type breath work that I'll do in different situations. Not all of it's appropriate for behind the wheel, of course, but the ones, I think that it is a really useful tool that I know for myself, it takes me from like that very high stress level much, much further down to a more manageable, not going to spike the system too much level.
Well, there is, if somebody can regulate breath and really, be aware of the changes in it, that's something that I think the value of breath is. It's a way of us to actually tune in and feel where we are in any moment. So it's an incredible tool for, anybody, whether it is somebody that's got anxiety. I had panic attacks when I was younger. I occasionally would have anxiety rise up within me and not know where it was coming from. I will tell you, that was one thing that disappeared when I began my breath practice. So I got an understanding, a personal understanding that whatever was going on and running, a loop in me, I got an opportunity. And I use the word integration, not letting go. When people talk about stress, so many people think you got to let it go. Well, I always say whatever happened in your life is part of your life and it created what's going forward. There's a difference between that and acknowledging it and stress leading your life where you're in fight or flight all the time. You were talking about cortisol. When the sympathetic nervous system, which is our reaction nervous system saying, hey, you're driving down the road and a dog runs across and you put the brakes on, we want that to kick in. But then we also want the parasympathetic, which is our recovery system, to kick in right after as we're breathing deeply, slowing our breath down, getting that heart rate back to normal. What I let people know is having a recovery practice, and we're using breath because you and I are talking about it now. If you have something in place, what happens is you're daily allowing that recovery system get everything it needs, nourishing it so that when we need it, it turns on. And COVID was a really good example. There was so much unknown and there were so many people that were watching everything. And unfortunately, it really sent many people into a panic. And I was in touch with a lot of people through that time. And the first thing I said was, you got to stop watching everything. But having a practice like this could just be one of many. Like you said, you've got lots of different tools, and doing a wonderful meditative yoga practice is many things if you're tuned in where you are working on breath or, connecting with your breath there as well. So yes, it's great tool and resource.
Well, I want to shift gears slightly because this is so related.
Sure.
But, I also want to highlight just that I find in my work and something I have struggled with in my personal life as well. Like a lot of people struggle with rest. And I would love to hear your thoughts about why rest is so important and maybe what you wish everybody knew about that.
I feel like a lot of times when people are thinking that they're resting, like they stop doing work, say at the computer, but then they're on their phone and they're scrolling. And I'm guilty of it too. I mean, I'm checking up on something or whatnot. Rest to me is when you kind of stop the overstimulation from outside sources. And it can be something where you're listening to waves. I mean, I have one album that I have on my phone where it's meditative waves. So there's some brain waves in there. And for me, it's better than even a soothing piece of music because sometimes you can get busy in your head. I had a conductor that I was working on once, and he would come in, and this is where it shifted for me, even what I had playing in my office, is I had music, and as soothing as it was, he was busy in his head with the music I was playing. And so that experience with this conductor actually helped me to say, you know what, I'm going to put waves on. So there's lots of different ways of doing it. I happen to live in a beautiful area of the mountains. When I go outside, even if it's taking my dog for a walk, I'm breathing, I'm in a calm space, my dog's in a calm space, he's picking up off my energy. There's so many different ways of resting, but I think what's more important today is a rest from technology a bit so that we can really, just kind of stop that stimuli and then engage in nature. Because for me, nature is so important wherever you are, whether it's sitting in the yard and looking at flowers that you planted or something like that, driving to the water if you're near it and watching the water, just even watching it. I love I live near, a river here. We have the San Juan River that runs through our town, and I'll go down and watch the water go around rocks. It's a great metaphor for the water doesn't try to force itself through the rocks. It actually finds its way around, and it's a really cool way of looking at flow. For me, water's a great metaphor. So rest to me is real important. It's not just sleep. It's actually resting. By the time you get to sleep, you want to have restorative sleep. And that doesn't happen if you don't know how to build in rest throughout the day.
Those are some wise words. I think a lot of people, the people I work with, and I've been guilty of this in the past, and I still have to keep it in check. But there is this tendency to be one just to doing up until you're like, oh, it's time for me to go to bed. And like, of course, your brain's not ready because you still have all this stuff circling in there. And yeah, I think there's something I remember that was a game changer for me in my own life was a yoga teacher, explaining that traditionally, as they were saying that yoga was considered a way of preparing for meditation. And
I love that you're bringing that up. Yes.
It was like a light bulb went off.
It really is because, what was considered kingly yoga was meditation. That's really all of the physical. If you think about it, it's to get all of the antsy out of someone and all of that. And today it's kind of shifted a little bit. I think that we're kind of going back to that. There's a lot more, there's people that are looking at it that way. I think initially when yoga came onto the scene, it was another form of exercise. It was like, let's go in and get a workout. Let's make it, we're going to do hot yoga. We're going to do power yoga. And I did teach a form of flow yoga. And then I did get away from it because I found other ways that I really started moving more toward a mobility rather than a set, group of postures. I like to incorporate the dance and the kind of flow that I felt in my body because I felt like I was losing that a little bit when I got very rigid about it. And so for me, it was by the time I, had retired my practice, I had been teaching a little bit of everything. And I mainly did things that started feeling good in my body where I was at this point in my body. I'd done a lot of physical, activities. So that was important to incorporate. Yeah.
You've had such a fascinating career path. And, you've shared that when you closed your practice or when you retired from your practice in 2020, you have shared that you wanted your next chapter to be meaningful. And so I want to talk a little bit about kind of how you found your way to working with OOFOS and just sort of what that has been like for you. Because I know listening to you talk about that technology and that aspect of recovery has been like really fascinating. I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, back in 2011, one of the founders of OOFOS, actually, he had relocated to the West Coast. I hadn't seen him in 20 years. And he reached out to me through email and said, Linda, do you still have a practice there? And, are you still working with athletes? And I said, yes. And he said, well, I'd like to come in for an appointment. He was coming in, he was dealing with an injury. And I said, sure. Well, he nonchalantly mentioned when he came in to see me, I had worked his wife, who had since passed away, ex-wife. She was a professional athlete. So he knew me in the day where that was the crux to my practice. It was all professional athletes. And specifically, I really did specialize with runners, marathoners, and runners in general. But when he came in and mentioned that he and a few other, designers and other people involved in the footwear industry from Reebok days and whatnot, they had this shoe. And I went, oh, and he didn't tell me much about it. He just said, we have this shoe. I want to know what you think about it. He did not mention that, whatever qualities that it was, recovery, anything. So he sent me a pair of sandals. And that's all they had at the time. It was a thong style that went between the toes. And I have to say, when it first arrived, it was hot pink, fuchsia color. And I looked at it and I went, well, don't wear that color. Don't understand. And I didn't really wear sandals a lot, but I thought, well, I've got to give them feedback. So you better put it on your feet and take a walk. So I put it on. Nobody was at my wellness center at the time. And I was oohing and ahhing like about what I was feeling. I walked into my, studio and I'm walking around and the way I describe it is my feet and what was happening in my body was sending messages to my brain. So all of a sudden, I was getting these messages going back and forth. And a lot of it was, what am I feeling? What's going on? I began wearing those shoes daily. I worked in them the whole day. And what happened was I started to put down into words and articulate what was going on physically in my body. And it was a first for OOFOS at the time. They hadn't launched the brand yet, but nobody had put it into words and articulated what was physically going on. And it was my testimonial, if you will, or my experience. So they were fascinated, like, wow, she's put this into words. Nobody's done that. That's when they got me connected to the marketing director at the time. Her name was Duncan Finnegan. She was our first marketing director. And they said, would you meet with her? So we started meeting. And we weren't talking recovery, Jess. We were talking, like, what is the word we could use to describe, Linda, how you're feeling and how everybody else is? And the word they came up with was rejuvenation. So our first campaign was rejuve and move. And it was great because people stepped in them and said, oh my gosh, I'm feeling this, that, and the other. We had no research, no studies. However, I think the important part was the testimonials are always in my world going to be king. How people talk about it, because research is great, but we all know if someone's not having the experience, then it doesn't really matter. So, so that's really how I started in there. And it became where I was just spending time with them. I didn't get paid. At the beginning, it was just like, no, this is fascinating. I love that all my years of this work can actually lend some, assistance to educating. And so I started out in that role. And now my formal title, if you will, is brand educator. I educate internally, our teams so that they're prepared to go out and share the technology. And I also educate our clients because a lot of people are not used to experiencing what they're experiencing with the technology. It's very unique, very different. So that has been my role. And I've kind of grown within that and really enjoyed the ride, the process here.
Yeah, I love that. Some of my favorite work experiences have really come about from sharing my honest experience of using something and kind of connecting with someone. Because, I think there's that just natural, conversation that happens and a desire on both ends to understand and, approach how to just improve people's lives through what you're doing. And I, similar to what you shared, like the first time I put on a pair, I was like, what is this? This is really, this is nice. This is weird. It's just, I think we like this. It was like,
all of those adjectives are so perfect because it's the experience. And I like to share that with people when someone says, this is really strange, I go, right? It is. It's feeling different because it is, that experience. Yeah.
So could you tell our listeners a little bit about the technology? And because you and I are talking about it, we're like, oh my gosh, but like what would you tell them about it?
Yeah. So what makes it unique, the mission of OOFOS is to make you feel better. And I do love that because when you asked, when I retired my practice and decided to come on a little more full-time with OOFOS, my reason for that was in all the years that I've worked with them, it's really complemented what I did daily. It just is that theme of making you feel better. The secret with the OOFOS, I like to call it the secret sauce, is the foam. The OOFOM, we call it OOFOM. It's a special foam that's really unique to OOFOS. It's proprietary. What they did is they designed a footbed to maximize the properties of the foam. That was the whole purpose. And, I'm going to just hold this up here. This was our first shoe. And this, when they sent it to me, it was the hot pink version of this. But the idea is they wanted for the foot to have freedom of movement over the footbed. So when they designed a sandal first, the idea was to get it on as many people as possible so that people could experience this unique technology. So the foam has got a 37% impact absorption. And what I tell people about that number is it's very significant. Typically, when people are wearing other shoes, and let's talk about athletic shoes, when you're wearing a running shoe or an athletic shoe, the foam used in those is intended to propel you, to actually push you. And so when you're running a race or when you're running or doing something, it's great because it'll make somebody move faster. It'll encourage that movement. When you're done, though, you want that impact that shoe is encouraging to stop. And so what happens when someone steps in our shoe, immediately their body weight is displaced to the side significantly. And that's where the 37% impact absorption comes in, more so than other materials. The other thing is our shoe is designed and the foam is designed so it's moving at all planes of motion. The research studies that we did validate everything that I'm sharing right now is that it evenly distributed the weight over the footbed. The foam allowed that and the footbed design together. The two together were the magic. One without the other does not produce the result. So OOFOS has got to be an OOFOS, footbed design and the foam. But as it allowed it to move in all planes of motion, it's delivering the benefits of walking on a natural surface like grass or sand, but on a hard surface. So if we lived on natural surfaces, Jess, it would be fantastic because ultimately grass, earthing that people are doing, the vibration from the planet, sand, it's beautiful for your feet. However, we don't live that way. We have hardwood floors, we have cement under carpet, we have asphalt and, outside. So the idea was to kind of give people a break from the unnatural surfaces and allow that OOFOS to kind of produce that. So I say to people, if you're outside and you're on the grass, take your shoes off, including your OOFOS. Get your toes in the grass. If you're in sand, many people that wear our shoes that know what it's like to walk on a beach, if you take a long walk and you go, wow, this is activating. Yeah. It activates the deep muscles in your feet. It gets them doing their job. There's a reaction the body has with it. The other significant thing that was really great is I always tell people, not all soft foams are alike. What makes OOFOS unique, there's a slower rebound. And what I mean by that is you're not just bouncing all over the place. There's integrity to the foam so that it's not over moving different joints in the body. Now, if somebody's got an injury and they're compensating, that's a whole different, category as far as if they're walking, they're already compensating. But what our shoes allow, the body to do is if there is discomfort and pain, it eases that. So there's a more natural gait too, while somebody's coming, recovering from whether it's plantar fasciitis or some other inflammation in the foot. So the technology was something I had never felt, and I'd been in the industry with athletes so long that I've seen a lot of things. So for me, like you, Jess, when you said you put them on and you went, oh my gosh, what am I feeling? That is the experience most people have with our technology, so we have lots of styles to kind of accommodate the architecture of people's feet. And I help with that as well.
Very cool. I know. Well, feet, I've had foot problems that weren't diagnosed. I was like 24, 25. And I remember it was like a light went off. It's like, oh, this is why this hurts and that hurts. And like, we all have different things though, right? Like I have, relatives with like other stuff going on with their feet, but like those people that don't think about their feet and how they feel, like I cannot relate to that. I know they're out there, but, I actually had told a whole bunch of my relatives about them. I was at like a gathering with like a whole bunch of my aunts, and I was like, you guys have to try these. And like over the course of the summer, I saw like different family members had got like different styles that like suited their needs. And I was like, oh, okay. How you liking that? Like everyone said all the same things, but it's like our feet, like they do so much work for us. I had a patient when I was fresh out of grad school. She was very I worked in long-term care. She was very elderly, and she had dementia, and she didn't remember that she would ask me this every time I saw her. But every time I went to check on her, she would say, so what is the most important bone in the body? Every time. And I would always pretend like I didn't remember. She would say, it's the big toe. And I just love that. Like, and it really got me thinking, because like, we walk around in our feet all day long and they support us, and like most of us don't pay attention to them unless we have to for some unfortunate reason,
Right. Well, and people are motivated by pain,
yes.
Right? And so, yeah, and it's a great marketing thing when a company, when there's claims made around different footwear, I wouldn't be with OOFOS this long. I would not have been with them had it not been consistency with the testimonials that came out of it. I had a reputation with people that I worked with. So that was on, I don't want to say on the line, but in a way, what was great is for me to introduce our footwear. And I've introduced it to many, many athletes that they were sponsored by other companies and they were closet wearers of OOFOS because, they couldn't wear it out in public necessarily. But the other thing too is there's a lot of, talk about, the word recovery. And I like to address that because, when we did nutrition and you understand, with nutrition is, when the word natural came out and it was used in marketing. Yeah, it was used in marketing. And for me, my journey is at a very young age. When I was 15, I was actually on a journey to really do some major, major nutritional and dietary changes for myself because I wasn't getting help conventionally with things that were going on with my body. What I didn't know, Jess, at the time, and I learned later, was stress and anxiety had a lot to do with that. Okay, and that wasn't addressed initially. I actually went the nutrition route. But I would look out there, and of course, I was deep into, at a very young age, organic, and of course, that's another word that's used a lot instead of certified or whatnot. But the idea is when we start to use the word recovery, like what is that? What is truly, it's not just what we put on our feet. That is one thing that, like I said, with OOFOS, it actually addresses that. But it's we talk about active recovery with OOFOS because we want, when someone finishes a long day, say there's somebody working in a hospital, nurse, doctor, they're on their feet the whole day. We have some people wearing our shoes the whole time. Other people, they need to wear a shoe that's, laced up and medical and geared for that. And then, but at the end of the day, when your feet are tired from wearing a conventional footwear or whatnot, we want you to still be able to walk after more naturally. If, say, you've got to go do errands, you've got to go to the grocery store, pick things up, come home. What our shoes really have helped people do is be able to actively continue to move, not as intensely as you were, but continue to move and have a more natural gait because maybe there's a little less pain. Maybe the lightness of our shoe, they're very lightweight. They're not weighing you down for whatever reason. But the recovery is to continue to be in motion, not just if you sit down on the couch, that's okay. But a lot of times when someone does that, after a lot of activity, they get very stiff. The body needs to move a little bit and then do, like shower, bathe, go to a pool, swim in a pool is wonderful recovery as well. But that's another thing where it's like after your athletic activity or your work day or whatever, what are you doing for recovery? And so we're a big part of that for many people.
Yeah, I love that. Now, you actually led me very nicely to the next question I wanted to ask you, because I think those little, then you've been talking about like little daily habits, daily tools. I love asking my guests, what are some of your just day-to-day self-care essentials?
Well, I build it in throughout the day. And, because a lot of people are working remotely, it's made it really wonderful to have that. It's almost like some people give themselves permission. Some people don't, though. When they work remotely, they get feeling guilty for doing things. I don't feel that way because I think it helps me be more productive. I'm somebody really, really big on hydration, but proper hydration, not overly doing it. For me, recovery is, drinking my water. I put some minerals in my water because I filter my water. So that to me is really important to nourish my fascia system and my nervous system. The breath. I know I've already mentioned that. I have a daily practice. In the morning when I wake up, I stay in bed for a little bit and I focus on my breath and get tuned into how I'm feeling in that moment. I love to have an intention with my breath. So in the morning, it's really to take on the day. And so I focus on intentional words, whether it's words or thoughts that have me excited about the day. I am fortunate in that I very often wake up and say, I get to do this, what I've chosen to do in my life. And I think it's important if someone wakes up and they're not feeling that way to take a look at that. And because it's, what wakes you up in the morning, what gives you purpose. And if you're not feeling connected to that, that's something, like I said, that's worth a look at. At the end of the day, same thing. Before I go to sleep at night, I'm one of those gratitude people. I like to look at what I'm grateful for in the day, what happened during that day, and focus on something that uplifted me, that had me feel better or feel great about the day. And that built in has been a great form of part of my self-care. I am somebody very physically active as well, though. So I engage in hiking, walking if I'm not able to get up into the mountains. Typically, the hiking is a weekend thing because it takes a little time. But I have, a yoga mat in my house and I do my mobility work. I have a Airdyne bike and I like to do my sprints on my bike. That's something, to get my cardio. So those things are really self-care as well in a different way, but if it's all in a balance, it really has complemented my lifestyle and it's changed over time. I mean, I've changed everything I've done. Now I'm going to be 64 soon. And so what I do physically for myself now incorporates a lot of mobility and a lot of feeling good in my body. It's just, when I was younger, I didn't think of that so much. I really didn't. It was like, get the workout in and get to work and,
Right.
yeah. And if I felt really sore and I felt uncomfortable, you just work through it. I was one of those and I did it. And then I went in and, was working with people. And I really had to take a look at that as I got further in my career of, what are you doing? You're giving advice to people, but you need to start to really look at it yourself and balance it out. So
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think sometimes, and I see this a lot in my work, because I work primarily with women, but big age range. I have patients and clients in their 30s, people in their 70s, 80s, and something I've been really struck by is how many women think they have to be doing the exact same thing that they did, in their 20s.
right.
When they're maybe in their 70s, and we're allowed to evolve. I mean, that's part, to me, I feel like allowing yourself to change as you change, that is really good self-care. And I just find it so fascinating that people are conditioned to think that there's like one set of like the correct thing to do, or that like you hit this like peak and then you have to try to maintain the same thing when, I feel like day-to-day things can be really different even.
Well, if you ask somebody, like this is another question somebody will ask me, what's the best exercise for me to do? And like I said, with breathing, I believe the body's designed to move. I really do. I feel like, everything leads to that, to let us know. But if we really look at that and take the word exercise out, I think that there are words like when I look at the word diet, I actually, was talking to somebody about this. I look at it as an acronym: daily intake of everything. And I do feel like the thoughts that we have, particularly it's very strong with women, and especially as we age, what we're supposed to look like or feel like. For me, staying physically connected to my body by moving it is really important because it gives me a feeling of vitality and I'm active and I'm able to do things that if I didn't engage in that, I don't think it would be as easy to do. So, but I think it's important for, like I said, the message, especially for women is, to have those thoughts, not to do exercise to fix yourself, not to eat a certain way to fix something, because when you're doing it that way, it's going to be temporary because it's feeling like I have to do this to get this result, rather than nourishing. What would feel nourishing to my body, mind, body, soul, even physically, is what I'm doing physically with my body, nourishing myself. And for me, pain was a motivator. It was. There are times where I expected more out of my body as I was aging. And I thought, like, why can't I, blah, 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 the whole thing. And then I had to stop. And my body commanded my attention, and pain was the command. It basically said, no, we're not doing it this way. So you can find another way. And I was on a search. And so when I opened myself up to that, so many things came in to help me have a better connection with myself. And when I find those things, I typically share them with a lot of people. I'll go, explore this, see if it resonates with you. And, but that's where, getting quiet and getting our mind to quiet, and breath helps that. Then you can hear that message. And a lot of times we're all getting the messages. We're just not hearing it or acknowledging it because, I don't know about this, that sort of thing. It's different. It's not as familiar.
Thank you for shining a light on that. I often will tell my patients, my clients, I'm like, our bodies are really smart, but it's our job to listen to them. And it's really, there's so many excuses we make not to listen or things that we think we should be listening to instead. And so thank you for sharing the importance of tuning into that inner wisdom.
You're welcome. Like intuition, when we talk about it, I will say to somebody, don't let anybody tell you what you're feeling in your body. Only you know. I mean, I actually do this with customers with OOFOS when someone's saying, well, I know it's supposed to do this, but this is what I'm feeling. And I'm saying, that's okay. That's all right. Perhaps, very often you have, you're meant to, if it comes to OOFOS, wear another style or whatnot. However, your body's intelligence knows what feels right. So if it's not feeling good emotionally, physically, and otherwise, what's going on in life, that's when maybe press pause. And for me, that's the word I use is press pause, slow down, and allow yourself to see what's coming in because there's so much incoming. And, just with the stimuli, like I said today, everybody is telling everybody how to feel. There's this diet, there's this thing, you should do this. Every time you turn on Instagram, there's another ad for something. And it is challenging. It really is for people to kind of know. And to me, it's still going back to, can you hear your voice? If you can't, you have to get away from that so that you can start to know what your voice is or what you're feeling, So it really, that's the big thing as far as coming back to, how do I feel? How do I feel? How do I recognize what I'm feeling? And, that's a real big one for me and big learning for me over the years.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I know I've taken up so much of your time today. Thank you for speaking with me. So if people want to connect with you, OOFOS, learn more about the brand, what's the best way for them to do so?
Well, they can absolutely go through the website and they can, if somebody, asks to get a hold of me, everybody knows who I am, been there long enough. And so they can ask, and I'm more than happy to help somebody if they're unsure, say they go on and it feels overwhelming to look at everything that we've got. I can help them or direct them to have the best experience, based on what their needs are. So they can absolutely go through the website and get a hold of me through that if they want to, through customer care or email, and ask for me directly.
Great. And we'll be sure to link to all that in the show notes and as well as socials and all that good stuff. So Linda, the last question I ask everybody who comes on the podcast, I know I give you a heads up, but, and I know that this is something that can shift day to day, but today, this moment in time, what does healthy living mean to you?
Healthy living means to me that I am living from a place of joy and everything else is a ripple out from there. So healthy living is really monitoring what I'm paying attention to, what I'm reading, what I'm taking in, what my focus is. And so everything else changes from that. I believe that, our cells acknowledge thoughts and our bodies respond to that. And it's something that science has actually, I think complemented. But for me, it's really, really, if my mind is in a healthy space, my body follows. And it's, that's been my focus, but it's a daily focus. And today is no different.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I so appreciate your time, your insight. So thank you for being a guest today.
You're very welcome. And thank you for having me.
And so for all you guys out there who are listening, maybe you're taking a walk or you're relaxing a little bit with some mellower, informative content. As always, I appreciate your time, your energy. If you like what you hear, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing. If you feel moved to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, they do matter and help me to continue to bring wonderful guests today like Linda. So as always, guys, have a wonderful day and we'll talk soon.